thank you all so much for joining us and spending this part of your morning with us. This is a very exciting day for NCSL. Today we are releasing to the public the culmination of almost 2 years of work and study by a wonderful group of state legislators and legislative staff who were tasked with the question, what can states learn about education reform from the top performing countries? This work was inspired by an NCSL session at the Washington, D.C. Fall Forum in 2013. Some of you may have been there, if you remember. Several of the folks who were part of that original panel are going to be with us today. But this was a session that was held very shortly after the 2013 PISA results were published. And we heard from Andreas Schleicher from OECD. We heard from Mark Tucker at the National Center for Education and the Economy. We heard from Randy Weingarten from AFT, who's here with us today, Senator Bruce Starr, who's with us today, and others, about what the PISA scores mean and what the takeaways are from those top performing countries. Immediately following that discussion, leadership of the NCSL Education Committee came to us and said, this is really interesting stuff. We want to learn more. Could NCSL help bring us together to study this and learn more about what these countries did and how they did it? And so at that suggestion, we worked with NCSL, we recruited some partners, and we recruited 22 state legislators, 11 Democrats and 11 Republicans, all very savvy on education issues in their states, most of them chairs of their education committees. And then we asked 6 very senior legislative staff who work on education issues to join us as well. So the NCSL International Education Study Group was born, 28 members, 22 legislators, 6 legislative staff. And we began this wonderful journey around the world to study what these countries could teach us as states, what was relevant, what was important, and what kinds of takeaways made sense for state legislatures and states. And today we're having the chance to talk to you about what those findings are and what they mean for state legislatures. The first thing I want to do is ask members of the study group who are here to raise your hand, if you will. I'd like them to, and you'll have to shout out because this is a big room and I want people to hear you. I want you all to be able to know who was on our study group. As we go through this morning's session, we don't have a lot of time. We are not going to do formal Q&A, but I want you to be comfortable to do informal Q&A with the legislators and the members of the study group as well as our speakers. So many of them are at this table. Senator Lehner, maybe you could start. Could you stand and just introduce yourself and shout so people can hear you? Senator Sokola? Representative Guile? There's some folks at this table here. Julie Pellegrin? Rachel? Okay, I'm seeing the people in front of me. Are there any other members of the study group that I've forgotten? Okay, great. Legislators and staff who are members of the study group. We also had the support from 5 terrific partners who worked with us to help us learn a lot more about the issues that they care about. And several of those partners are here. American Federation of Teachers, Chris is here, worked with us. National Education Association, is Daya here? Hi, great, good to see you. And then we also had with us, and I don't believe they're here, we had partners from the Business Roundtable, ACT, and also Microsoft. Is there anyone here from those organizations that I missed? Okay, great. We also had the support of an amazing staff at NCSL who worked with the study group and helped produce this report and work with them to put their thoughts into writing. And I'd like to acknowledge Michelle Ekstrom here. Michelle? Madeline Webster over here on the end. And Lee Posey from our DC office. Lee? We had a great time working with these legislators. There are several major findings in this report, and you have it in front of you on the table. And I want to just highlight the most important ones as we head into a discussion with members of the study group and our panel. The first finding that was extremely important was that student achievement in the United States is stagnant and falling behind the performance of other countries. These countries are moving all of their children forward, and our education gap continues to grow. There is an urgency in this report that you will see at the very front. Second, as different as we are from these countries, there are lessons to be learned from their experiences. Next, there are 4 fundamental elements in the reforms of all of these top-performing countries. First, children come to school ready to learn, and extra support is given to struggling students so that all have the opportunity to achieve high standards. These are on page 11, begin on page 11 of your report. Next, a world-class teaching profession supports a world-class instructional system where every student has access to highly effective teachers and is expected to succeed. Next, a highly effective, intellectually rigorous system of career and technical education is available to those preferring an applied education. And fourth, individual reforms are connected and aligned as parts of a carefully planned and carefully designed comprehensive system. Those are the 4 major elements that the study group has found to be the most important lessons for states. So here's how we're going to run the next 45 minutes or so in this session here. We're going to begin with 2 members of the study group, and I'm going to ask them a couple questions about their experiences and their findings and their messages for state legislatures. We're going to then turn this stage over to a panel moderated by Mark Tucker. The folks at the National Center on Education and the Economy were with us along the way, and as I like to say, they opened the world up to us as we studied. Mark was wonderful. The support from Betsy Brown-Ruzzi at the National Center were so significant to our work. And then we will finish with the panel. We've asked the study group members and the panelists to stay behind. You will have a chance. Please come up, ask questions, get copies of the report. Whatever questions you have or more information you would like, please ask us at the end of this. So let me begin by introducing Senator Howard Stevenson from Utah and Senator Joyce Elliott from Arkansas. The first question I really want to ask you both is what key messages from this work you really and mostly want your legislative colleagues to hear. Senator Stevenson.
Thank you. Let me first just mention that Sharon, there we go. Is that, do I just need to swallow it? Let me first mention that Sharon Tomiko Santos from Washington was originally going to help here, but she had to return home because of a medical emergency in her family. But we're so grateful for Senator Elliott being able to pinch hit, and that's why she doesn't have a name tag. So the thing that became so clear to me at the outset was this notion of highly effective teachers. And it became so strident in why we don't have that in abundance. And it first starts with our teacher colleges, our teacher preparation. In America, we have 1,400 teacher colleges that are all doing their own thing, and take it or leave it. What we supply our customers, the school districts, the LEAs, is just what they have to take. In those countries, the education system told the teacher colleges, and there were very few teacher colleges, how to do their job and what they wanted in the way of teacher preparation. So I think there's a lot we can do as legislators in that regard. Also, in America, teachers are thrown into a classroom on being hired, the door is closed, and it is a solitary, lonely process generally. In those countries, teaching is a public process, a collaborative process that is involving everybody in the process. Also, on that first year of teaching, teachers aren't required to come up with their own lesson plans. I mean, as you think about it, why would we expect you to close the door and, okay, it's all yours, you've been trained for 4 years, somehow you ought to have the magic pixie dust, you come up with your own lesson plans. In Shanghai, for example, they said their lesson plans were polished stones. And each newly inducted teacher had to learn how to deliver the polished stone effectively, not invent it herself. And so that really has, it created such an obvious dissonance for me of what we need to change, because we shouldn't leave these teachers on their own. It should be a collaborative process. In fact, in some states or districts, if the principal wants to observe, they have to set up an appointment a week in advance. But in Singapore, in Shanghai, in Finland, it is a public process, and teachers love that kind of support.
Senator Elliott, same question. Key messages.
Thank you. I guess all of us have great ideas. We certainly do think we do. And one of the very key things that was obvious to me right away was that those ideas we have are often silver bullets. And we think if we just shoot our magic bullet, everything is going to fall into place. And that is absolutely not what these countries have done. Rather than everybody's idea being placed into the educational arena and hopefully that this is going to be the one, what they did instead was they've taken years to put together a coherent system and taken the time to make sure once they put the system in place, they stayed with it. For example, because we elect the next prime minister or the next president or the next senator, the mission did not change. Nobody comes in and gets elected and say, now I'm the education governor this year or prime minister. And that's one thing I think was hard for us as legislators to do, because we've all thought if we just do this, if we just do that, this is going to be it. And we had to let go of some of our junk to make sure we could get to a consensus that you called the report. The other major thing was about child readiness. We didn't just expect, they don't just expect kids to show up, and Julie mentioned this a bit, but there's a whole culture around a child being ready when the child shows up at school. And there's not discussion about this other than how are we going to get it done, not whether or not it should be done. For example, in Finland, you leave with this box of preparation tools that the government will provide or from the hospital. Because this is the notion that from this point through age 7, where they don't start school until 7, that we are going to be doing the things we need to do and supporting parents and communities so that children are ready. On the other hand, in the Asian countries, that's more a part of the culture of the community itself, kind of like everybody taking responsibility for other people's children, and family members do an even more in-depth job than we do here. And the other thing is that is to lead to equity. There is no excuse about not achieving equity. There is no discussion about achieving equity other than how do we do it, not whether we should do it. And then finally, the way they create standards, very high standards for everybody. Assessments of those standards, but the way the assessments used, though, I think is something really new and different for us. They use the assessments to inform teaching and learning, not for high stakes, the way we have done. That was one, I think that's one of our silver bullets. Thinking if we just do the testing, put a label on the schools, everything will magically fall in place. That's not the way it's done, but once again, it's about the thoughtfulness, the coherency of it all, the stick-to-itiveness to make sure that it works and it becomes a mission of the country. And we had to let go of things of assuring ourselves we are so different from those other countries. That is mythology. We are not all that different from these other countries, and some we're more alike than we think we would ever think we would be. And I have just walked away from this absolutely convinced this is something that we can and must do for our kids. And we don't have to settle, because after all, Poland didn't settle. Estonia didn't settle. When I see them, and they're just recently, into this, on the big global market of things, and there they are, ranked in the top 10. We can be there too, if we choose to be. It is a choice. And we chose to work together to get us here today, and I'm so proud of our group and what everybody in our group has done.
Thank you. Just very quickly, Senator Stevenson, that members of the study group feel really excited about the timing of this report and these recommendations. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to why this is an excellent time for states to be thinking along the lines of the recommendations.
Thank you. This is an amazing timing because of ESSA being passed as a Christmas miracle last December. It really was. President Obama called it that in the signing, and it devolves authority to the states in immense ways. And if you look at the language itself and the prohibitions against the U.S. Department of Education and the Secretary in making things contingent, making funding contingent on their kinds of things, it gives us the flexibility, and it gives us an opportunity to achieve greater equity too, as Senator Elliott indicated. And by equity, we need to understand that in these leading countries, they focus much greater resources on the students who need it most. And that is a very conscious part of their process. And with ESSA, we have greater ability to do that with federal money in particular.
Yeah, I was just going to respond in terms of we just came from a session about the teacher shortage and what we can learn from these countries regarding ESSA, because ESSA will give us a lot more flexibility and thinking about, for example, how do we get the highest performing teachers to work with the students who need them the most. Because in these countries, what we learn is if you want to move ahead, one of the really nice things that some of the countries have is that you don't get to move up the ladder unless you teach in certain places first. You don't get to start out at the very best school and say, now, am I not great because I had the greatest of everything? I think that's a really important lesson about equity that we learned. And as we are looking to take responsibility for what the opportunity we have in ESSA, this report will give us some really good guiding principles about things to do at our very local levels, at the state level and locally, principles that we know that work. And finally, I think one thing that's so interesting about this is the very, very high regard folks in these other countries hold American experts in education. And this might say to us, maybe we can take advantage of that as well, because that's kind of what they have done to move ahead of us. That's a shame, isn't it?
One just quick thing. What we found in these countries is that they did not expect unanimity in these planning groups. One of the mistakes we've made in American education strategic planning is requiring consensus.
Right.
And consensus basically means we're going to get the lowest level of challenge and vision. They set a 75% threshold, so that if you can get 75% of the group to agree, then you should move forward with it. Mm-hmm. And we have to move away from this consensus thing, because it really has not produced much. It's produced a lot of 5-year strategic plans that haven't moved the needle.
Yeah, there's some great stuff in the report about consensus and how to think about that in your states. Thank you both. We're going to transition. I'm going to ask Mark, Randy, Bruce Starr, and Terry Holliday to work your way forward. While they're coming up, I'm going to introduce them really quickly to you. Mark Tucker is the president and CEO of the National Center on Education and the Economy. He is someone who has spent his lifetime engaged in education reform efforts and studying what we can learn about education reform. Terry Holliday was Kentucky's 5th Commissioner of Education, served there from 2009 to 2015, and is known for a variety of other activities that he continues to be engaged in. Bruce Starr is currently Vice President of Government Affairs for iCitizen. You can read more about this in the bios that are on your table. Senator Starr used to be in the Oregon legislature, and while he was in the Oregon Senate, he served as president of NCSL. So we're really happy to have him back, and I remember he moderated the panel back in 2013 that inspired this work. And Randy Weingarten, president of the 1.6 million member American Federation of Teachers. I'm going to turn things over to Mark Tucker.
But before you do, there is an iPhone here.
I will take it.
Is this yours? Okay,
I'll take it, Randy.
okay. I just don't want anybody to lose it.
Good morning. As you just heard from Julie, the work that led to this report began when NCSL decided to create a study group to look into claims that a growing number of other countries were far ahead of the United States in elementary and secondary education. What I'm going to talk to you about for a couple of minutes is what then happened. Julie and the other members of this very fine staff told us that they had never seen a study group work so hard for so long on a task like this. They read mountains of documents we gave them. They visited other countries we sent them to. They talked with experts that we brought in from all over the world. As you would expect, there were many who were skeptical at first, but all of them listened, and they focused on the data and what it had to say. And in the end, it was clear to everybody. The United States is now outpaced by close to 30 other countries, and that number is steadily growing. Our workforce, not so long ago the best educated in the world, is now among the least well-educated in the industrialized world. The threat to our country's competitive position and even to its political stability is frightening. And all of them came to understand that. The study group members had heard all of the excuses. They had heard them for years. We educate everybody, they only educate an elite. If you just take out the poorest kids and the minorities, the United States would have one of the very best performing education systems in the world. All those other countries are homogeneous, and we are so heterogeneous. But when they looked at the data, they saw that none of those excuses held up under the glare of the facts. The study group concluded that the United States has been pursuing, and you just heard this from Joyce, silver bullets that have been getting us nowhere, while our competitors have been building highly effective systems. Those systems are built on providing the help, as you heard, that young children need to be ready for school. It actually is more than that. What the data show is that in the United States, when you put all sources of funds together, the wealthiest kids get the most. And the kids from the families and communities that are hurting the most, those kids get the least. That is exactly the opposite of what they saw these other countries doing. They saw them building highly effective instructional systems that are in turn built on high standards. They saw each of these countries looking over their shoulders at the other countries, and every time they looked over their shoulders, they saw their competitors raising the standards, and they knew they had to raise their own a little higher. They saw that it wasn't just standards, that in all of these countries, those standards enabled them to create curriculum frameworks. And those countries built curriculum that was based on the frameworks. Very strong, demanding curriculum. And they built very high quality assessments that were based not on the standards, but on the curriculum. All of this knit together into one highly coherent and very powerful instructional system. One of the most important things they saw was that everywhere they looked in the top performing countries, expectations were very, very high. They expected a lot from their kids, and the kids got the message, and they gave a lot and accomplished a lot. They also saw that in the top performing countries, it wasn't all about academics and going to university. It was just as much about the kids who weren't going to university, about building a really strong applied program for all their kids. And they understood in those countries that you don't do that by assuming that the smart kids go to college and the kids who can't do academics go into vocational education. What they saw was that the kids going into vocational education, what we now call career and technical education, were meeting very high academic standards. All their kids were. But most important of all, what they saw was that our top competitors have been working overtime to build the highest possible quality teaching profession. The United States is recruiting its teachers mostly from the bottom half of kids going to college. Most of these countries are recruiting their teachers from the top half or a higher segment. In the United States, if you can get into a university, any university, you can get into the School of Education. The average American state has about 40 teacher education institutions. But you go to these top performers and you'll see that they have fewer than 10 for a country that is the same size as our average state. And what they're doing is putting most of their teacher education into their research universities, which essentially means you can't become a teacher unless you can meet the admissions requirements of a top university. And then they insist that they really know their stuff. That includes their, what we call elementary, they call their primary teachers. Most of them specialize. So they've actually majored, elementary school teachers, in mathematics or in science or in literature, what they're going to specialize in. There's a lot more to it than that. They require their teachers to learn their craft and learn it well. There are no alternative routes in these countries. So how do they learn their craft? Mostly they learn their craft at the hands of master teachers, real master teachers. They know they're master teachers because they have career ladder systems in these countries that are really quite aggressive. They offer a real career to people who are thinking about going into teaching. As you go up the ladder, you get more responsibility, more authority, more status in your community and in the school, and more pay. It looks a lot more like a real profession than it does here in the United States. And guess what? They pay their teachers well, much more relative to the United States than we do. All of it goes together in a package which is very attractive to young people in high school from the upper reaches of their high school graduating classes who could go into the high status professions. They choose to go into teaching, which has become, in effect, a high status profession. When the work of the study group was done, they had worked hard to write a report that would convey a sense of urgency. They had all been parts at one time or another of groups that had produced the usual sort of report, where they all sort of sit down and everybody's idea is in there in some random way. None of it adds up, and all the edges are shaved off. They said they didn't want to do that. They didn't want a report that looked like that. They wanted a report that was tough. They wanted a report that sent the message out to the American people that this is a very urgent matter. And that's the report you have in your hands. I think if the American people had had a chance to see your legislators at work, they would have been very, very proud. I'm going to take an opportunity now to ask a few questions of the folks to my right. We'll see if I can engage them in a little conversation. The aim here is to get some views of this report from people who did not write it, but who are in key positions in our society, representative of the kinds of people on whom much depends for its implementation. I'll turn first to Terry Holliday. Terry, you and I worked together on an agenda that looked a lot like this in Kentucky. You have been yourself to many foreign countries, looking at their education systems. You have been working since you retired from your commissionership in Kentucky with chief state school officers around the country, helping them to understand why a systems view is so important and why it's important to look at other countries. When you look at this report, Terry, what do you see? Does what it says represent what you have come to believe about what the challenge is? And if it does, how do you think your colleagues around the country, commissioners of education, are going to view this report?
Let me applaud the committee for their hard work and certainly tell you that our work in Kentucky with Mark and his team was phenomenal work. Their team dedicated many hours to giving us benchmark data to help understand what you're going to get in this report, in the executive summary. I think when you look at state chiefs, the first thing you have to understand is, like governors and House and Education Committee chairs, there's a lot of turnover. I think we'll have 34 new state chiefs in the last 18 months. So there's a lot of turnover. That's good and bad. It's very exciting in that they may not be wed to the status quo. And the status quo has not worked. We've created a climate that is not supportive of teachers, which is the exact opposite of what's in this report. So I think the four big things state chiefs will buy into very quickly, because State Chiefs Organization, Council of Chief State School Officers, has recommended these four things over the last 5 or 6 years. We had a major task force on improving the teaching profession and making it a quality profession, and that work is continuing today in many of your states. When I was chair of CCSSO, we had a career tech task force that pulled together all key business leaders, chamber politicians across this nation to create a report that mirrors the recommendations in this report. The early childhood readiness recommendation, right on target. But the big one, and Senator Elliott, you nailed this one, the big one is a systems approach. I see a few governors in this nation that I'm working with their states. I'll just call out one in Nevada. really understands how to leverage the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, possibilities of Carl Perkins, and school structuring reform, higher ed reform, to create a systemic approach to it. All of your state chiefs have a wonderful opportunity with ESSA, Senator Thompson, to make certain that they create a comprehensive plan, not just the old siloed plan where Title I does this, Title II does this, Title III does this, and the people in the bureaucracy say, you can't have my money because I've been using this money for this purpose for 30 years. You need to pull all that together in a comprehensive approach through a comprehensive Title I plan that is integrated with your WIOA plan and with your Carl Perkins plan. Quit thinking of those in a state as three separate plans. If you want long-term sustainability, the governor and the House and the Senate need to take leadership and say, we want a sustainable, comprehensive plan where all of these things are integrated, not just ESSA, but Perkins, WIOA, and your state higher ed plan need to all be integrated, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get the results that you want. We'll be sitting here 5 years from now and another task force saying, we're not there yet. This is a wonderful time, a wonderful opportunity. As I go across the nation and working with state chiefs and governor's office and House and Education committees, I find such tremendous possibility. It's not enough to get me interested in getting back into it full time because I like playing golf, but I am very encouraged. We have so many bright, young, energetic state chiefs out there who are ready to really do this work. But the big thing, I'm sure Randy will talk about it more, we have got to create a better climate for our teaching profession. And so my volunteer efforts are, I'm the board chair of the National Professional Standards Board, and so happy to talk to any of you about how that can play a role in one of these key recommendations. But I'm looking forward to some states really picking this up as specific strategies to put into a comprehensive plan. And the first thing they need to do is get a good benchmarking report from folks like Mark, and his team just did a tremendous job for us in Kentucky. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Terry. Randy, your organization has now for many years, pointed your members toward what other countries are doing and the need to learn from them. Mm-hmm. You've been very, very clear about that, and it's been a leader in pushing the cause of teacher professionalism. This report, if fully implemented, would change the lives of teachers in many, many very specific and big ways. Are your teachers ready for that?
Yes.
Excellent.
I mean, so this is, that's the kind of short silver bullet answer. The longer, more thoughtful answer is that what is remarkable about teachers, regardless of how they get in, how they've been prepared, how how many times they've gotten the keys thrown at them and just told to do it, and I bet even Nike didn't just do it, right? But is that they come with a sense that they want to make a difference in the lives of children. And that you can see in the kind of arc of a teacher's life that excitement gets snuffed out each and every day, not totally, but because of the frustration that's always at them. And whether it is the isolation or whether it is data as a weapon as opposed to a way of information, of course people want data. So I think that there is a well of real sense of longing for a system that will allow them to flourish, as opposed to a silver bullet that they actually have to deal with one year and then something else the next and then something else the next. And each time starts with, this is the best thing that has ever happened. And if you get, everybody's been through that, right? So what I actually love about this is that this is a model in two ways, Mark. Number one, just like ESSA, yes, it was a Christmas miracle, but it also was the hard work of a federal legislature that had actually listened to the people, parents, students, educators, that said, stop with just the testing. Maybe we should think about 3 other T's: tools, trust, and time. And maybe we should actually think about doing things like, how do we meet kids where they are, not pretend that they're somewhere else? How do we engage them instructionally with powerful learning like the new generation of CTE is? How do we actually do these supports, like in things like community schools that a lot of you are doing across the country now, to wrap supports around schools? And how do we build the capacity of a teaching force, which Mark has been talking about 10 years before I met him? From preparation through evaluation, including if somebody shouldn't be a teacher, figuring out a way that we exit them from the profession in a fair and responsible way. People want this, and the simplicity is only matched by the thoughtfulness of having these 4 different issues, or 4 different standards, or 4 different elements. So the last thing I will say is this. There are ESSA on the federal level, just like what you've now done on the state level, debunks all sorts of myths that people can't come together and find common ground. Very thoughtful, very important common ground. All of us then, just like with ESSA, ESSA allows you to do all of this. But just like with ESSA, the most important piece is what we do tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, in terms of how we work together to get these pieces implemented. Teachers will want to do it. They are waiting to actually make a difference every single day in the lives of young people.
Thank you, Randy. Bruce, you are a businessman, legislator, former head of the NCSL. You approach all of this from a number of what I take to be key perspectives. The larger frame of this report is not just about education. It is about the society and the economy. And it puts on the table the idea that this country cannot possibly have a successful economy if we have the least well-educated workforce in the industrialized world. Tell me how your business colleagues are likely to look at this report, and tell me from your perspective as the former head of this organization, NCSL, how you think legislators across the country are likely to react, especially in the economic framework, to the education proposals made here.
Well, it's again an example of NCSL's great work. I'm so proud to have had the opportunity to lead the organization. But we're working in a global economy with global competition, where employers and companies are looking to invest, build new infrastructure. One of the key things that they look at before investing in a particular place is what's the education system look like. And so the competition is absolutely real. In a former life, I did do economic development for a local chamber of commerce as well. So clearly understand the importance of having a workforce that is absolutely prepared. What you see in this report is so critically important and so timely. You look at all of the challenges facing our states and our nation, and if this challenge of bringing up the next generation in an educated way that can compete not only among our states but internationally, if it's not the most important challenge facing our states and our nation, I don't know what is. And I think that you will find as policymakers, partners in the private sector who are really thirsty and hungry for the kinds of solutions that are found in this report. I know that, I just know that's true. And you look today, and sure, you can point at situations where, private companies are partnering with a local community college in order to build the workforce for their particular needs. But this is a systematic approach. And the roadmap that exists here, I think, is something that policymakers, legislators, legislative leaders, educators in various states should grab hold of and move forward aggressively on in order to hit this challenge head on. If we don't do it, I fear for our country, I fear for our states in the long run. And for an economic development rationale, we all know what the demographics look like today in America. We know what those numbers are, and we have to prepare that next generation of students. Otherwise, I think the long-term damage to our states and nation is going to be very, very sad.
Thanks, Bruce. Terry, when you and we together began the work in Kentucky, I remember a conversation in your conference room in which we concluded that if this was educators doing something to come up with an education proposal, it would come to the governor and the legislature as a plea for more money or more something, but always including money from another mouth to feed. That if it was going to work, it shouldn't come that way at all. That it needed to come to the legislature from the governor, from members of the legislature, from a very wide group in higher education as well as lower, and many others, that it needed to be seen not as an education proposal, but as the key to state competitiveness, and therefore the well-being of every citizen of that state, that it was education in the service of these larger issues. As you look around the states and this report says that about as clearly as any report possibly could, as you look around the states that you are engaged with now, are you still of that view?
Absolutely of that view. I think that view came to me very quickly when I was recruiting the team to serve on the committee. The Chamber of Commerce president in Kentucky said, now, Doc, if this is another education reform, he said, I've drowned in too many waves of education reform. We've done pretty well, but here's my big issue as a business guy. I got folks who can't find people to fill the jobs that they have vacant, and then we've got tons of income inequality in Kentucky and across this nation where we have a land of haves and have-nots, and that gap is rapidly increasing. And, if I sat down in front of my House Education Committee and said, we need to do these 4 things, higher ed might be saying, well, that K-12 guy just wants more money again. So you're absolutely right, Mark, that was the issue. So where I'm seeing states that are really figuring out they can't go the old siloed approach. You cannot separate out higher ed budget, K-12 budget, Perkins budget, workforce investment Act budget. You can't separate out all those things. You've got to come together, as I previously said, with some strategic outlook. Now, my concern is that as we get more clarity on ESSA regulatory language, I am afraid that too many will fall back on status quo, because what drives all of this is eventually assessment and accountability. And if we don't continue to push, like New Hampshire and others, on the innovation and the use of assessment data and be very thoughtful about the accountability. And this does concern me with our civil rights community, as sometimes I don't think they see the forest for the trees with pushing too much on individualized student test scores. So I am concerned, but I think we're going to have 5, 10 leading states that really do exciting work and come out with great coordinated plans. So I'm still hopeful, but not as much as I was 6 months ago.
So Randy, when you look at this report, there are a lot of very important features to it, but with respect to what many of us take to be the core issues here of building one of the finest professional teaching forces in the world, because this report comes out, I think, very clearly on that point. As I said earlier, that would entail some very big changes, among them really ratcheting up the requirements to get into a teacher education program. Possibly limiting the ability to offer teacher education to institutions that are hard to get into, rather than any institution that wants to offer one. Having licensing requirements for teachers that would make it much more difficult to become a teacher than it is now. And then once you're in schools, creating career ladder systems which would really change what it's like to be a teacher. Create a world in which you're not working alone in your classroom all by yourself every day, but you are part of a team of teachers who are taking collective responsibility for improving the way that school works and for raising student performance. With more experienced teachers taking real responsibility for ratcheting up the performance of the teachers who are newer and less experienced. How ready are your teachers for those things?
So, you know, some people are really ready and some people are not.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I'm a big believer in using collective bargaining as a way of trying to do some of this work. So, for example, I thought Mark was actually going to ask the question that he and I talk about routinely when we're not on camera, which is how do we actually change the conditions in schools to, you know, so that, you know, it doesn't feel like a factory model in 2016. Right. And there are several places now who have school-based contracts. New York City is one of them. They call them the PRO schools. There are more PRO schools than there are charter schools in New York City, about 200 of them. And what the schools have done through collaboration, not through unanimity, they have 65% that agree instead of 75%, they have actually really thought about 4 or 5 different areas. How you promote integration as opposed to segregation, how you bring more people in a more diverse way together, kids as well as teachers, how you use time differently for student support. And I can go on and on, how you use evaluation differently. But the point is, what's happened is, at least in that lever, they've used the collective wisdom of people who care a lot to think about how to change the circumstances in schools, and they have gone from initially 60 schools to 150 schools to this year 200 schools. So I think, Mark, what has to happen is you have to get to some entry point in terms of the systematic change. There are going to be some, you know, we tried to Flexnerize, for example, the teaching profession by saying a few years ago, let's have a bar-like exam, let's have real clinical kind of training, let's take a piece out of what happened in medical education over 100 years ago and really kind of think through teacher education in the same way. In fact, Harvard is starting to think about teaching hospitals in that same kind of way, and we're starting, and there are urban residencies. So you have to start somewhere. I prefer to start with, you know, the system of schools as opposed to higher education, the system of schools that are there right now, and start using collective bargaining, start negotiating things like career ladders, start having more and more kinds of things like we do in the AFT, Share My Lesson, which is a sharing resource that almost 1 million people are on, the largest, fastest growing free sharing resource of curriculum. And frankly, we have to also do something about pay. Today, another study came out that said that teachers are about 17% behind similarly skilled people in terms of pay. So we have to make this an all-in process. Deal with teacher preparation schools, deal with career ladders. Let's work on using collective bargaining as a way of improving our profession, not just a way of improving pay, but a way of improving the profession, really focus on professional development and things like that. And I think we should actually look at places where there's a coalition of the willing in different states. And finally, I would say this. There is an aspect of ESSA that can break through all of this, which is 7 states can actually do a very different accountability system. I would urge there to be 15, 20 states applying for those 7 slots. If we do that, which is a much more performance-based model of accountability, where we're really engaging kids in their work in project-based instruction, like New Hampshire is thinking about, like some of the performance consortium schools in New York and in other places, we're going to see very, very different models and very different excitement in terms of what schooling looks like, very much like Bruce was saying before.
You have in your hands a very hard-hitting and very ambitious report. You have heard essentially in the last few minutes that the chief state school officers are more than ready to sit down with you. The teachers are more than ready to sit down with you, and the business community is ready to sit down with you. If ever there was a time, this is it. Thank you.